Okay. God bless you all. I have a message for you. There's a lot of things I would like to say, about this trial that I've been going through. But I don't know if I should. Look, I want to be honest with you. The Bible tells us that we need to, confess our sins one to another. And so, my problem is, I don't know if you guys believe this or not, but are there still prophets? Are there still those parts of the body that the early church talked about? Because we don't see a lot of things happening, that the Bible talks about. It says that these signs shall follow those that believe, that they'll cast out devils, they'll heal the sick. And you don't really see that. And then you hear the talking heads in the church, whether it's the Catholics, the Baptists, only the evangelicals still believe in these things, but you don't see a lot of those miracles happening in there. I tried to do this message yesterday, but for some reason the camera wouldn't focus. But what I want to talk about is, the Lord had called me to preach the gospel, and I just kept running from Him. And in 2011, He spoke to me while I was drinking some high-priced Scotch whiskey is what I was drinking. And my brother and I were doing a radio show with classic rock and roll music, Led Zeppelin, stuff like that. And the Lord spoke to me while I was doing that and told me to stop what I was doing. Repent, I am coming soon. And I was a believer back in 1991. I'd fasted for 10 days. And the Lord spoke to me and told me to get up and go pray for my neighbor across the street. This was at 1 o'clock in the morning. And so I resisted that, and He told me, look, if you don't do it, I won't let you sleep. So I prayed for him, and I went out there, and God did some miracles to prove to me it was Him that was talking to me. And then the next day I was asking Him, what about me? I fasted for 10 days, and you have me pray for my neighbor. And so God says, well, I'm going to do something for you too, because I said, well, you didn't do anything for me. And He said, in 3 days, the chief of the Bakersfield Fire Department will call you on the phone and offer you a job, and I want you to take that job. I'd applied for the job, but they'd filled all the positions, and it closed out, and it had been closed out for a month. So I was like, wow, this is really going to be a miracle, because they already sent me a card telling me all the positions, and I could reapply if I wanted to, but it was in law enforcement. And so 3 days, and then the Lord told, I said, well, how long will I work there? And He said, you'll work there 10 years. And I said, what will happen then? And He said, well, then you will go to the oil fields again for 1 year. And I said, well, what will happen after that? And He said, well, then you will do my will. Well, I left the oil field. I went, let me back up. 3 days later, the phone rang, and it was the chief, just like the Lord had said. And you don't have to believe me, and there's all these knuckleheads that'll view this video if they're allowed to, and they'll say, that's not real. But I'm telling you the truth. And I'm telling you this for a reason, not to say I'm anybody, because, God is the one that chooses our stations in life. If you're the king, God put you there. And if you're the janitor, God put you there. And all of those people, the king is not greater than the janitor in God's eyes. You're all doing a job that He has designed for you to do. And so I went to work for the fire department, and then this thing happened to me about, well, the other Christian guys were there like, hey, Rush Limbaugh's a Christian. Let's smoke cigars. Let's do this. Well, I knew not to do that, but I did it anyway. And over time, you start losing your connection with God if you don't really stay in touch with Him, if you don't stay in there in prayer and fasting and stuff. So then this alien thing happened where I was abducted, and two of my kids were abducted also. And then I had metal samples because they left traces and things, and I proved it was happening. I can stick a magnet and it'll stick right to my side right here because there's some kind of metal thing underneath my skin right there. And it emits a radio frequency of 1.2 gigahertz. And anyway, so these things told me that they were, you know, they manipulated Christ and everything. And I tried to cast the devil out of them, and they just laughed at me. And this alien was huge. He was like 7 foot tall or 7.5 feet tall. Very frightening. I couldn't look at him. I took martial arts for years. I was pretty good, and I was afraid of this guy. My knees were knocking together. So I believed their story, and so that caused me to... They told me there was a God, a creator, but he just wound the universe up and let it go. And that they manipulated what we believed about Christ because what they had made us out of was so evil. These monkeys, they said, and they were the monkeys they steal from each other and all that. So they said, well, we made this religion thing that made you believe that God would get you after you died and put you in hell. And that would keep, 70% of you from hurting each other. And they showed me the end of time. They showed me the terrorists attacking on 911. I have a sound recording from a hypnotherapist where I state that's when it happens on 911, and that it's these Arab terrorists that do it. This was in 1996 or 7, 4 to 5 years before that ever happened. So and I have metal samples, and I have DNA samples and everything. I was a big deal in the UFO world, but I got tied up with some Hollywood types who put me in a contract and tried to, they didn't want this information really to get out. But anyway, what I know now is that the aliens are actually fallen angels. God told me that. But He let me suffer for a long time, and He didn't talk to me. And then He began to talk to me again in 2011. So, what I'm trying to say is, God has been dealing with me. He spoke to me when I was 15 years old. I was hunting these mud hens on the Tuolumne River in Modesto. I was under a huge oak tree, and He told me, son, get up and walk down by the river. And the river was like 20 feet below me. And I didn't pay attention. Finally, the voice said it again. I stood up, and I thought it was my dad talking to me, my stepdad. And nobody was there, so I lay back down, and then the voice told me again, son. And so I stood up, and I was like, Dad! And then it just made my feet start walking. And I walked down to the bottom of the river, and it turned me around, and right then, a huge branch, like 8 inches or 10 inches in diameter, broke off of that tree, and it weighed about 1,500 pounds. That fell right where my body was laying. I had a body print of me laying in the grass where I was shooting these ducks. And so God verbally spoke to me and stopped that tree from killing me or putting me in a wheelchair or something. So God's been talking to me for a long time, and He told me that I was a prophet. And I don't talk about it a lot because I don't want to brag. I don't want to do that. And that's why there's so many things that I've told you guys that are on my channel that have happened. And I know some people, will say this or say that, but there's a few things that haven't happened, and that's just because that isn't the time yet, you see. But many things that I have said that God told me have happened. There are a lot of things that He told me that would happen that I didn't tell anybody about that have happened. I have a book that I keep records in and stuff, but my wife doesn't believe any of this. She thinks I'm a nut. But He told me something would happen with her 35 years ago, and that happened too. And then He told me a dark secret would be revealed, and that happened. So I've been praying because, see, I wasn't faithful to God. Even in this, see, because of this thing, when I found out what happened, it caused me to put me into a tailspin. And that's what I've been asking you guys to pray for me. And I continue to ask for your prayers, you know. And so I did some things that I shouldn't have done, and I'm confessing those right now. But there's bigger things. There's something that probably 70% of all Christians do that God doesn't want you to do. And if I tell you, you're going to flip out and tell me, oh, no, you can't do that. It's like the deal when I gave the sermon on divorce out of Matthew 5. Bunch of people, oh, brother, you're crazy. Why you? Well, that was Jesus' own words, and people don't believe it. The Lord told me that people would hate me for the message that I bring. And the message is God is love, and that you have to love your brother as yourself. That's what Christ said. So, back to this deal. I had a dream the other day, and God told me in this dream, I heard a song playing, and that song is called "Sweetly Broken." You know, and in the song I heard at the cross, like "Sweetly Broken" and "to surrender." And this thing kept repeating itself, and I called Brother Brian, OT for Christ, or Jesus, and he said, oh, I know that song, it's "Sweetly Broken." So I looked it up, and that's it. And I saw a cross in this dream, and God told me, because I was asking, God, what can I do? Because he told me I had to be punished for what I've done for not doing the ministry. And if you think God doesn't punish you, you better think again. He told me I was forgiven, but I was to be punished. Look at Moses. He struck the rock, and people say, oh, that's what it was. No, it wasn't. God told him, because you did not hallow me before the people, you can't go into the promised land. He said you can look at it, but you can't go in. So did Moses get punished? He sure did. So I saw a cross, and I heard God say, treat me like I am God. And I hear that surrender song. I'm going to play that song, and I want you to listen to it. It's very important. God wants us to surrender to him, to be broken before him, to love him, to obey him. And all these brothers fighting with each other, that's a bunch of nonsense. Pastor Patrick and I are having a little tiff. A miracle happened when I was up in paradise. I was talking to code researcher on the phone, and God had asked me to ask him to run the code, misses or miss, in regards to the asteroid. And God said it's going to miss. That's what he told me. And so I told code researcher, and he said, but Gary, I see in the plain text it says this is God's will and it is going to hit. And I said, well, run that. And he says, no, I won't do it. And then I was holding my cell phone, and something dripped on it, and I looked, and the palm of my hand had a quarter size or silver dollar size opaque piece of, looked like oil coming up out of my hand. And I was like, what is this? I thought maybe I'd touched something, and it was melting and dripping on the phone. And then Pastor Patrick, and I told code researcher, he's like, wow, man, that's really strange. And so we talked, and then we hung up and everything. And he doesn't have to do what I say, because who has to believe Gary Lowry? You know, I could tell you guys story after story about the power of God and what God has done to witness. But I'm not saying I'm somebody. Look at the guys in the Old Testament. They didn't either. I'm not saying that. God can speak through a donkey. I'm nobody, but I'm telling you, God picks people out to be the king, picks people out to be the janitor. God picked me to be this prophet. Okay, and so I'm telling you guys, the Lord is coming soon, and the Lord told me that, so anyway, the other part of that was, Pastor Patrick sends me an email the next morning, and it says, God told him that there will be miracles, like oil coming from the hands. And so Patrick and I are fighting about some things, because everybody is a man. We're all men. We all have desires and needs and problems. And none of us are perfect. I don't care who you are. So I want you guys to pray for Pastor Patrick. God called us to do a special ministry, and we're fighting. And I can't talk to him. He won't call me. But yet We're good Christian. And then he said some things about me on the internet too that only he and I know. And he promised he wouldn't do that. And he says, don't say anything about me and I won't about you. I'm not saying anything bad about him. I'm just saying we are to love one another. That's the ultimate commandment. Jesus said, they came to him and they asked him, what is the commandments? And Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and him alone, and then love your neighbor. The second commandment is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself or your brother. How's that love? And then you say, well, what about what you said about Greg Laurie and a few other people? I have to expose these false prophets if the Lord tells me to. And I had to talk about Greg Laurie and those guys because God told me that they were the 4 types of the church right now. And I'll have to find my notes. I should have made a video about that and told you guys, but the power of God struck me while I was mowing the lawn and about knocked me to the ground when he told me this, because I love Greg Laurie. I listened to him for years, and I couldn't believe what God was telling me, and he commanded me to do it, just like he told me to walk down by the water. The Lord told me, as far as the rapture goes, the Lord told me that when they come to take your house, Gary, and they propose to take mine, you will know it's the end of time, because my wife said, this has been going on for thousands of years. He's not coming. He delays his coming. He's not coming. He's not coming in our lifetime. And the Lord showed me a dream, and I could make a video about that if you guys want me to, about how I saw these 3 sevens, and then the Lord whipped me with a grape branch. He had the vine part in his hand, and the branch part was a 7, and he whipped me 3 times as punishment